Podcast Nation, I gotta say, I say this often, but this truly is a special episode because Cynthia and I've really felt we bonded at Eudaimonia. I got to go on her show, did a live interview, and she left me just touched by everything that she's doing, how she's changing lives, and hearing about her own personal clinical story and then how she developed the skills to reach out to so many of y'all really was inspirational. So Cynthia, welcome to the show.
So good to be here. And like you said, I do feel like we had this incredible connection. I got an opportunity to meet your beautiful wife and just really be able to record in person, which I think for so many of us, most of us are recording kind of distantly, but there's just some kind of unique energy when you can record in person with another guest. So very grateful to be here.
That is so true. I thought there was a bit of magic, but and I haven't had an experience since that. So it really hit home there. So let's start off with how we got here, Cynthia. You're a nurse practitioner, and you now have this amazing platform to promote healthy living. But how did it start for you?
Well, I always say I start as I am a reformed adrenaline junkie. So I was an ER nurse back in inner city Baltimore and transitioned kind of effortlessly into becoming a nurse practitioner in cardiology. And so I did that for over 16 years as an NP. And then I just got tired of writing prescriptions. I was so fatigued from addressing a lot of chronic health issues here in the US from the perspective of waiting till we get disease. And then I had patients that are on 20, 30 medications. You start them on a diuretic that gives them low potassium, then you put them on low potassium. The next thing you know, they've got gout, or as my patients used to call it, gouch. And I just started to become more interested in lifestyle measures. I became more passionate, obviously, about intermittent fasting. And so it's hard to believe, almost 9 years ago, April 1st, 2016 is when I left traditional allopathic medicine to really kind of start my own practice and really focusing and niching in from, that whole adrenaline junkie fueled environment to really focusing in on women north of 35, so women that are in perimenopause and menopause, because 9 years ago, there was even less discussion than where there is now. And I felt that women needed a voice and they needed good information instead of fear mongering and telling women, oh, you put on 15, 20 pounds, just accept it. This is just the way things are. And I heard that from a doctor, by the way. And I love my physician friend. So I'm just kind of being transparent and saying, I heard all the things that women share with me now, so I get how frustrating that can be. And so now the rest of my lifetime is really devoted to helping women in this unique stage of life and reminding people that the really cool thing about our medical training is that it translates into so many other things that you can do that still utilize your training, but utilize it in amplification of your messaging. And especially, I know both of us really niche down on talking about the role of lifestyle and why that's so important. And I think if more people understood the importance of sleep and stress management and the proper human diet, as Ken Berry likes to call it, but I like to call it nutrient dense whole foods diet, and really moving our bodies every day. I mean, a lot of those lifestyle things would solve a lot of the problems that we're seeing. And so kind of getting back to basics is a lot of what I focus on now. And to be honest, it's incredibly gratifying. And I feel very grateful and appreciative that I'm able to do it.
So Cynthia, how did you come to the realization that lifestyle modifications, these changes will be effective? Because let's be honest, we don't talk about it in medical school. I'd imagine in NP school, this is not a flavor. So how did you come to the realization that this is a possibility?
Well, I think, life kind of imitates art, and I have a child who has life-threatening food allergies. Only 30% of kids will outgrow their food allergies, and unfortunately, Jack has not. And when he was diagnosed as a toddler, he was 2, at the time, the allergist looked at my husband and I and said, carry an EpiPen and pray. I mean, honest to God, that's what I was told. And I was terrified. And so that got me started really thinking differently about nutrition and wanting to learn as much as possible. And so I was kind of an early adopter to really making all the food. I didn't feel like it was safe to take him to restaurants. This wasn't, almost 20 years ago. They just didn't have the access to nut-free, peanut-free, and he has peanut and tree nut allergies. Just feeling like if I took him to a restaurant, I wasn't sure if there wasn't cross-contamination. And the thought of giving my young child an EpiPen was terrifying, even though I've seen plenty of anaphylaxis, like the worst case scenario that happens when you've come in contact with something that you're allergic to. So I think that initially got me interested in nutrition. And in fact, my colleagues lovingly would tease me. They were like, this is the NP that likes to talk about food. And so they would refer patients to me. I want you to do a nutrition consult. I want you to talk to patients. And I would say of the people that were referred to me, maybe half of them were open to talking about nutrition. So the ones that were really validated for me that there was a need for this. And then that kind of branched out into how often we eat, how frequently we eat. So it got me interested in intermittent fasting. And then it branched out into other things. Dare I say, talking to patients about things as simple as, do you sleep enough? How are you managing your stress? I lived in a very hustle bustle part of the United States. I lived in Washington, D.C. My patients had horrific commutes. The cost of living is very high. Around 2008 timeframe, that was the first of, the kind of, housing market crashes. And I had patients that were telling me just horrific stories, trying to manage paying their mortgage and not losing their homes. And so for me, it just became kind of a natural extension based on like what I had gone through as a parent with a child with life-threatening food allergies that he has never outgrown, to the, shifting this focus. And one of the things that I would say to anyone listening is that I trust my gut. I know that that's, some people might say, well, that isn't per se a way to lead your lifestyle, but I've come to find that life will sometimes give me little opportunities to change my perspective on things. And so I always say, like, Jack is an incredible gift, but the gift of his food allergies was that it got me thinking differently about nutrition. And then what got me thinking differently about nutrition got me thinking differently about how frequently we eat. And then that opened up a whole other side of how I practiced. And certainly now, like, lifestyle as medicine is at the forefront of what I do. But Jack, my oldest, is the reason why I probably pivoted so substantially. But most of my colleagues thought it was weird. And now they tell me, when they look back retrospectively, you were way ahead of the curve. And I said, yes, but you still made fun of me back then. So hopefully some of that's worn off on them. Some of them are hopefully talking to their patients about nutrition. But you're right, we get little to no information. And most of it is under the false guise of, used to be the food guy pyramid. I'm dating myself, but now it's, my plate, which is even more garbage nonsense that goes on. So I humbly always say that our kids are our greatest teachers, and certainly Jack and my other son definitely are.
Wow. And certainly we're grateful that you made that pivot, even though it was under some unfortunate circumstances. So you start to learn more, and I'll echo this too, just to recognize that a lot of judgy people when it comes to this, a ton of judgy people. I mean, I still get it now, even though we're in 2025 covering a lot of these topics. But when I think of Cynthia, I think of intermittent fasting. I think of the clinician that uses this tool, leverages this tool to reverse disease, to get people into healthy lifestyle living again. And so, yeah, you give us a bit of a lens on why you were drawn to it, but realistically, who do you think about prescribing intermittent fasting to? What are some of the concerns that you have? And what kind of impact have you seen when it comes to involving or prescribing intermittent fasting?
Well, it's such a great question, because despite what social media or, the lay press would like us to believe, intermittent fasting has been part of our lives for thousands of years. It is not new or novel. It dates back to biblical times. It's how we have evolved as a species, because if we could not go without food, we wouldn't be here. Let's be completely honest. We are designed to be able to utilize stored energy as fuel in periods of time when we don't have food or access to food. So when I think about the talking about intermittent fasting, it's with the understanding that we're eating less often. A lot of people have been conditioned to believe, and clinicians have propagated this, we eat to stoke our metabolism. So we eat snacks and mini meals in between meals. And I'm here to share with anyone, if you haven't already been taught this, that's one of the reasons why we are so metabolically unhealthy. We are actually designed to eat, go several hours in between meals, get hungry, eat again. That is what we are designed to do. So when I'm thinking about intermittent fasting, it's defining what it is. It's eating less often. It's defining, what period of time that you are not eating versus the period of time in which you are eating. And just to simplify things, an easy way to think about it is that we have an 8-hour feeding window with 16 hours fasted. So the bulk of the time that you are actually fasting, you are sleeping. And I think people are convinced that they are going to be miserable when they are not eating. And I remind them, if you eat dinner at 7 o'clock at night and you don't eat again until 10 or 11, I mean, the bulk of that time you are actually asleep. So it isn't quite so overwhelming. But I think for a lot of metabolically healthy and metabolically unhealthy individuals, talking to them about eating less often is terrifying. So if we're going to talk about it from the perspective of how do we go about doing it, I would say 12 hours of digestive rest is a great way to think about it. You have dinner at 7 p.m., you don't eat again until 7 a.m. That is 12 hours of digestive rest. Is that fasting per se? No. But you're still conferring benefits. I have all teenagers. All my teenagers go at least 12 hours without eating, which is unbelievable, but they do. You have teenage boys, so you understand. When I think about who is best suited for intermittent fasting, I always remind people it's not children. It's not teenagers. It's people who are done growing. Now, obviously, young men can continue to grow into their 20s. Young women are usually done growing by, the time that they start having a menstrual cycle. But I typically will say, when you are an adult, it is certainly something that you can entertain the possibility of engaging in. I would actually argue that menopausal women and men have an easier time with fasting than women who are still in their peak fertile years, defined as before the age of 35, versus women in perimenopause, 35 to 50-ish. I just find that the menstrual cycle, there's time in our menstrual cycles to fast. There's times when not to fast. I do discuss this quite a bit in my book, The Intermittent Fasting Transformation. But when I think about who does best with intermittent fasting, most people do really well with intermittent fasting. And I would argue that if you have high blood pressure, diabetes, fatty liver, you are dealing with weight loss resistance, you are dealing with sleep apnea, you are very likely, in conjunction with discussing this with your licensed healthcare provider, would benefit from some degree of eating less often. And that might be 14 hours fasted, it might be 15 hours fasted. There are some of you that like to fast 2 days a week, and the rest of the time you want to have a wider feeding window. So I think in many, many ways, this is where if you are on chronic medication, I always say have a conversation, because when you start intermittent fasting, you may at some point need less blood pressure medicine. You may need less diabetes medication. You may need an alteration in your lipid management. You may need to take some preventative measures. And that's why I always encourage people to have a conversation with their providers. I have so many patients that have been pre-diabetics who reverse their pre-diabetes. I've had patients who were on multi-drug therapy to treat their high blood pressure who are coming off of their antihypertensives. And so from my perspective, this is where looping in your healthcare provider is important so they can keep a close eye on you. Now, it always begs to have the conversation around who should not be fasting. Well, I've kind of alluded to this already. Children, people who are still growing should not be fasting. I would say I would loop in people who are trying to conceive, pregnant, or breastfeeding. It is not a time to restrict caloric intake. And actually, I remember Dr. Terry Walls and I were having a conversation around this, and she was saying she's absolutely opposed to intermittent fasting, especially in pregnancy or in the trying to conceive timeframe. I would say the other thing is, if you're someone who's not a healthy weight, if you're underweight, if your BMI is under like 18, your body needs the additional food intake to be able to stabilize. I think if you've recently been hospitalized, I always share that, in 2019, I spent 13 days in the hospital. I didn't fast for a long time because I just had lost too much weight and I couldn't regulate my blood sugar. And so that wasn't a good idea. But in more instances than not, I think most individuals can benefit from a compressed feeding window and or at least 12 hours of digestive rest. And I think that for a lot of individuals, the more metabolically healthy you are, the easier it will be to go without eating. The less metabolically healthy you are, the more you are going to struggle with those symptoms. Many people don't like the sensation of feeling hunger. They just don't. It makes them uncomfortable, emotionally uncomfortable. And for those individuals, I always say, you put our training wheels on. Maybe we're going from, 12 hours of not eating to 12 and a half. And maybe in your feeding window, you're starting off with, MCT oil in your coffee to kind of potentiate and kind of buffer the effects of what you're experiencing. But I remind people that the freedom of intermittent fasting far outweighs any of the potential unpleasant side effects. Like, I know you and I do quite a bit of business travel, and I tell people there's nothing better than getting on a plane and the junk cart goes by and you don't ever even think about, you don't want the junk cart. You don't want the cookie. You don't want the processed carby junk that they're handing out. Maybe I'll have some water. Maybe. Occasionally I might have some beef jerky, but in most instances I fast while I'm traveling because to me it's just an opportunity to kind of upregulate some of the key benefits of intermittent fasting without having to worry about junky seed oils or ultra processed foods, which is what you find in most airports, unfortunately. There are a couple standouts in the United States. There are a couple airports I've been in that I've been humbly impressed by what they serve, but most are serving crap and junk. So from my perspective, intermittent fasting is something that we can consider, we can engage in, and certainly discuss with our healthcare practitioners to see if it's right for us.
I love it. I love it, Cynthia. And just to give you some context, for me, I started to get excited about it when I found that people were reversing disease with it, as you mentioned, type 2 diabetes or hypertension. Once again, you and I doing similar training, you weren't hearing this as a possibility. So when hearing that, using this lifestyle modification tool to improve outcomes for our patients, to me, it was such a huge lever. So one question that has come up repeatedly online and even people come to me with this too is, why does it work? Like, is there something magical about fasting? Is it just the caloric restrictions that make it effective? What's your take on why it works?
Yeah, I mean, if it were just about CICO, calories in, calories out, then we wouldn't be having this conversation. So
would you call it CICO?
Yeah, calories in, calories out. It's what the gym bros say. And okay. So I kind of coined it just to say CICO because that's overly simplistic and reductionistic. So when we're talking about the benefits of intermittent fasting, mental clarity is up there. There's neurocognitive improvement. Suddenly people, because their blood sugar is stabilized and they're able to tap into fat stores as a source of energy. Let me back up and talk about there's different forms of energy in the body. There's stored carbohydrate as glycogen. There's stored fats as fatty acids. Fatty acids are a long burning, it's like a big log on the fire. If you're using fatty acids, you're going to have a lot of mental clarity. You're going to have sustained energy versus like most individuals, at least here in the United States, that are sugar burners. They're burning glycogen. You're being chased by a saber-toothed tiger. You're going to burn glycogen up front because it's a fast source of energy, but it is not a sustained source of energy. It is not going to get you from kindling. Morning to night. Exactly. It's kindling on the fire. And so helping people understand that you are going to get a degree of mental clarity while you're in a fasted state that you probably didn't even consider would be one of the benefits. So number one, from top down, neurocognitive improvement, mental clarity. And some of that can also be from the ketones that are produced, beta hydroxybutyrate in particular diffuses across the blood-brain barrier. That's why we feel good. But I think about digestive rest, less bloating, maybe less constipation, less diarrhea. A lot of middle-aged women deal with those symptoms. I think about improvement in biophysical markers. So if we're eating less often, we're probably going to get improvement in blood pressure, lipids, in particular triglycerides and HDL, especially if someone is not metabolically healthy. I think about improvements in inflammation. We talk about inflammaging, that inflammation gets turned up, especially in perimenopause and menopause for women, that can lead to joint pain, can lead to digestive distress. I also think about, some of the other benefits. There's one scientific principle called autophagy, which is upregulation of diseased and disordered organelles. Now, you could make the argument that you have to fast for a longer period of time to get improvement in autophagy or mitophagy, which is recycling disease disordered mitochondria, which are the kind of the battery cells in our cells, little battery packs, kind of the ATP production. So I remind people that there are a lot of benefits, but those are some of the high points. The other thing that I'll see in a lot of my female patients, all of a sudden their menstrual cycles have improved, especially if they've got polycystic ovarian syndrome, which we know at the basis of PCOS is inflammation, oxidative stress, and insulin resistance. And so you'll see this multiplicity of improvement, but those are some of the things that we'll see up front. But I would say the mental clarity, and then people come to intermittent fasting because they want to lose weight and they stay for all the other benefits. They just come to it because they're like, okay, I'm weight loss resistant. I want to lose weight. And then all of a sudden they're like, I have more energy. I'm sleeping better. I have more energy to interact with my kids, my dogs, my significant other. My sleep is better. So I think of it as a very well-rounded opportunity to improve and optimize. And that's what we're talking about, optimization, as opposed to kind of the mindset that I certainly experienced 10 years ago was, you're in your 40s. This is just the way things are. Suck it up, accept this and that. And I'm here to tell you that, and your listeners, that it doesn't have to be that way. Intermittent fasting can be something that you utilize a few days a month, a few days a week. Could be that you're doing it 5 days a week. I think it's ultimately that flexibility piece for intermittent fasting is really important. But as I always say, people come to intermittent fasting out of the curiosity to lose weight. They stay for all the other benefits.
And so, as you clearly mentioned, you don't think, like, if I'm pre-diabetic, I'm 30 pounds overweight, you feel like it's more than just a CICO, calories in, calories out.
Yes.
You feel like, and like, I guess the question I'm trying to get, I have my theories, but I'm curious from your perspective, why do you think that is?
Well, I think it's all the things that are going on behind the scenes when you're not eating that are the benefits of fasting over just saying, I'm going to eat 500 less calories a day. Because they may still be eating in a 12, 15-hour feeding window, but they're just eating less calories. But when you have that compressed feeding window, when you are giving your body an opportunity to upregulate autophagy, of less inflammation, less oxidative stress, you're freeing up ketones that can improve neurocognition and reduce your risks of hopefully of Parkinson's and dementia and Alzheimer's, which I think every middle-aged person fears. It's like, what are the things I can do to lessen the likelihood that will be problematic? But I think that, as Dr. Jason Fung says, calories in, calories out is too reductionistic. It is too simplistic. Our bodies are not just, using bomb calorimeters to determine how much calories we intake. It's all about hormonal regulation. And I think one of the ways that we can harness the benefits of fasting is I know a lot of people hate this term, but balancing our hormones, but getting a degree of self-regulation of insulin and glucose and cortisol, and indirectly sometimes some sex hormones can be hugely influential, not to mention things like leptin and ghrelin. I think for a lot of people, eating less often allows them to dial in on those appetite, satiety hormones that can influence a lot of our food choices and how frequently or infrequently we're eating. I'm curious, when you're talking about fasting, what do you like to focus in on in terms of the benefits with your patients?
Well, I mean, so two things. One, when it comes to my line of work, my patients don't speak, so it's often people just coming to me with seeking wellness advice or lifestyle modifications to improve usually because they're overweight, or sometimes even the perimenopausal women looking for some support. And I say it's harder to, number one, it's harder to get those calories when you have a smaller window. So like, I think there's an aspect there, but I also think, this is my theory and I have nothing to prove it, or I haven't read anything to prove this theory. I think when you have spikes in your insulin, when you're more pro-inflammatory, it would be like taking that calories in and calories out equation and amplifying components. So if you're eating something that is more insulogenic, made up that word. If something is going to be more pro-inflammatory, if it was 100 calories, now it's going to be 150 calories to your body, and vice versa. Like if something was on the books as being 100 calories, but you've been fasting and you had a bunch of protein with it, then you get less of an insulin spike. So you're getting less perceived calories in terms of your how your body responds. That's the way I've always kind of looked at it, because I agree. Like I've seen too many people on the keto side. I've seen too many people that have focused, like, they're having the same amount of calories or more, yet they're still losing weight. Their body comp is still improving. So I'm a believer that it's not as simple as you mentioned. It's there's more to that story. But I always like pushing people like us, because it's not like I don't know if there's a RCT or I don't know, like even bench model study to kind of prove what we're saying. That's yeah.
Well, I think you're right that the average American eats anywhere from 8 to 10 times a day, and each time you're eating, if you're eating what most Americans are eating, you're eating a lot of processed carbohydrates, and if we just even look at macros, the impact on blood sugar dysregulation is highest with carbohydrates, and then protein, but protein tends to buffer it, and then fat has almost a negligible impact on insulin. So it goes back to this nutrition piece. The choices that we are making still have an impact on our blood sugar. But if you were just eating a bowl of rice, a bowl of pasta, a Pop-Tart, a candy bar, that's going to have a very different effect on your blood glucose, insulin, cortisol, as opposed to having a steak with broccoli. And so I have kids that lift very heavy. And so they know exactly the levers they need to pull around lifting, but they're very metabolically healthy and athletic. And so I sometimes am humored when they make, 2 cups of rice with their chicken. And I'm like, that's great that you can eat that. I probably wouldn't fare so well if I did. However, with that being said, just helping people understand that the choices we choose to make when we eat can have a really profound net impact on our metabolic health. And this is where, when I talk to women in particular about fasting, helping them understand your feeding window needs to be wide enough to consume 100 grams of protein a day. And if you can't, then we need to work on that. And this is why, we talk about how as we get older, that impetus for muscle protein synthesis, I always say my kids can sneeze with 10 grams of protein and I need 30 to 50. We know based on the research that we need more stimulus to grow our muscles as we get older. That's why we have to lift heavier weights. That's why we have to eat more protein. Otherwise, we're succumbing to sarcopenia. So it goes back to that conversation about, yes, we want to eat less frequently so we keep insulin and blood glucose stable, but we also want to make sure when we are eating that we're eating the right combinations of foods. And it's interesting. I just submitted my book manuscript about the gut microbiome and the changes that occur in middle age in women. And, I was looking at why the ketogenic diet doesn't work for some women. And a lot of it has to do with the composition of the gut microbiome. And so, you touched on keto, and I know keto for some people is incredibly powerful. And then I have other patients that do keto and they gain 10 pounds on keto. And they're like, wait a minute, this wasn't supposed to happen. But if you actually look at the research, the gut microbiome has a tremendous amount to do with how much calories are extracted, how your body processes things. And so sometimes a higher fat, lower protein diet may not be the right diet for you. And that's why, working with clinicians that have knowledge of nutrition and meal frequency is so important.
Yeah, there's so much here I want to hit on, Cynthia, because I think I alluded this to you when we first met. The gut microbiome is an absolute mystery to me, but I'm going to leave this fairly open and let you go where you want to go with it. But when it comes to the middle-aged woman, you touched on some strong points, and I've learned just through conversations, not through clinical experience, that there is nuance there. Like I saw, even, in fact, I don't know if you found this, I found some even women struggle with fasting in general.
Yep.
Like, in terms of, and my theory was, and maybe I should leave this for you, but trying to extend those fasts too long, and so they're getting a more of a cortisol stress response. So they're retaining fluid, retaining their weight. So I'm curious, one, like nuances when it comes to perimenopausal middle-aged women, because they're a large part of the audience that are listening now. Two, the levers that you want to touch on, like you mentioned protein, mentioned weight training. And three, if the gut microbiome is a large part of what we're having to manipulate or adjust, or it's just something that we should be keeping in the back of our minds.
Yeah, all such important questions. I would say that, one of the things I see with frequency is women in their 20s and 30s, they have a certain way that they can dial in on calories and they can dial in on exercise and they effortlessly lose weight. Well, that changes as you get older. And so I think for a lot of women, the mindset is if a little bit of fasting is good, more is better. If a little bit of exercise is good, more is better. If a little bit of caloric restriction is good, more is better. And I call it the triad. And these are women who are their bodies are so stressed. We know we become less stress resilient as we are navigating early perimenopause with that loss of progesterone signaling from the ovaries. And so a lot of these women are it's too much stress on the body. We use the term hormesis, but too much hormetic stress. And so in some instances, these women would be better off doing 12 hours of digestive rest, dialing back on the intensity of exercise, eating more food, which seems completely counterintuitive when they're trying to lose weight. So, number one is like having an honest discussion with yourself. Are you overtaxing your body? And I can tell you when I was probably 42, 43, I was still doing very intense CrossFit-like classes at my gym. And I was doing spin and I was just doing a lot of intense exercise. And I just hit a wall. I completely hit a wall. And I went through an entire year where all I did was walk. I'm not kidding, an entire year, because my adrenals were so thrashed. I don't like the term adrenal fatigue because I don't think that's a real term, but we can speak to the fact that we know that women become less stress resilient, and part of that are some of the hormonal changes that are occurring, but we have to do the right kind of exercise, the right kind of nutrition, the right kind of intermittent fasting around our cycle. And only if we're in a position where we can successfully fast. I agree with you that a lot of times what I see is women really wanting to push the fasting. Maybe they've dialed in on the exercise and the stress and the macros, but they're still fasting 2-3 days every week. I'm like, what are you doing? Like there's a very well-known biohacker who's in his 20s, super nice guy, really smart. And he does like 2 long fasts every month. And I was trying to explain to my husband, he's like 25. It's different. He can get away with that then. But what I get is women in their 40s, 50s, and 60s that want to fast all the time, relentlessly. And so it's helping them understand, like, are you honoring your body and really having a frank discussion with yourself. And I think, the other piece of that is, the macros piece is so important. It's like, can you get your macros in your feeding window? And if the answer is no, then you need to widen your feeding window or not fast at all. I do a lot less fasting at this stage of life than I did 5-10 years ago. And that is because I'm trying to build muscle, and it's a lot harder at this stage of life. It's not impossible, but you have to be very diligent. And I would say the other thing is when we're looking at the gut microbiome, yes, we know there are benefits from eating less often on the gut. But again, it's all about that hormetic stress. Is it the right amount of stress at the right time? It's not when you're going through a divorce, you've lost your job, you're going through a big move, you're not sleeping, you're super stressed out, you can't even get through a workout because you're so tired. You're irritated, you're irritable. Maybe your hormones are taking a nosedive, and we all know that our hormones govern everything that we do in our bodies. And so I really think it speaks to every woman's experience in perimenopause and menopause is as unique as they are. So what works for me may not work for you, not you, but I'm saying you, like proverbially you or any other person. And it's really doing a little bit of the experimentation of the N of one. So for each one of us, figuring out like what makes our bodies feel good and being honest about it, what makes our bodies feel terrible and avoiding those things or saying no to those things. And I think that has been my experience over the last 10 years, working with patients, is really seeing, like, encouraging women to tap into their own intrinsic wisdom of their bodies and determining what feels good. And a lot of people don't like having to think for themselves. They've been conditioned to believe that we listen to these influencers online, or we follow one ideology and we aren't willing to evolve. And I tell everyone, just be open to the possibility that what you did 2 years ago might not be what works now, and that's okay. And so just throughout the rest of our lives, we may course correct to find what works for us. And so I share openly, I lost my dad last year, and I promised myself that I would not succumb to sarcopenia and frailty, which is what contributed to my father's death. And one of the things that made sure I was in alignment with that was that I needed to widen my feeding window. So does it mean that I never fast? No. But for day to day, I'm very conscientious about 3 boluses of protein, enough protein every day, lifting heavy weights and being consistent about it, and helping women understand that, you don't have to do the same thing forever. You can course correct. And that applies to men as well. Like figuring out what works for you. What works today may not work tomorrow, and that is okay.
Once again, just wanted to express how sorry I was to hear about your dad. I know it was around eudaimonia. I think it was before eudaimonia, but February 2024 now. Oh my God, time is flying. Or November 2023. I don't know.
It all runs together.
It all runs together. And just wanted to express the admiration too of pivoting and wanting to be strong. And you, as you mentioned, I know you did work in the cardiac units, and like that's what we're trying to avoid, is like that frailty element. It's I think I mentioned this on your podcast, how it's actually hard to die. It's the machines work. It's about that quality of life. It's like, how are you going to function afterwards? So I commend you for not being dogmatic. It's one of the things I look for in leaders and people that I admire, is that ability to pivot when appropriate. As you acquire knowledge, as you go through experience, what are you going to do to change and improve your situation? But I am curious, because I've been going against my own advice. I've been pretty dogmatic about fasting. As some of you could tell, I went to the dentist, so I'm only speaking with one side. So I was trying to power down a shake before, and then I'm on Eastern time, so it's I've only had a shake today. It's 2:45 over here. What was my question? My question was, I've been, for the last 6 years, I don't eat breakfast. Occasionally, depending on what the scenario is. So how's your window changed? Because you mentioned like you've expanded your window. So I'm really curious to hear how that is pivoted.
Yeah, I know it's interesting. My dad passed in June, and without overburdening your community, my dad's frailty contributed to his death, and it was actually really incredibly sad, because we lost my stepmother last year as well. But they're in a better place, and they're probably thriving now. But I think for me, that was such a powerful experience to go through. I think when you lose a parent, and to lose it in a way where my brother and I had to make some very difficult decisions, honor what my father wanted, and make some very difficult decisions in the neuro ICU and the trauma surgeon. And it left enough of an impression on me that I walked away saying, what am I going to do differently? Because I am my father's daughter. We are both kind of English, smaller body habitus people. My dad was not a big person. And I was like, I could be just like my father and be his age and falling and hit my head. And so I was like, right away, the thing I need to do is really get serious about strength training. And I really need to be serious about my protein intake. And so from that point forward, I hired the most amazing personal trainer who was wonderful. And she is not a fan of intermittent fasting. And so we have these very vivid conversations. And she wasn't the reason why I stopped fasting regularly. It was with the understanding that I can't get enough protein in. And it was like a consistency issue. It's different when I'm traveling. I do anticipate it's going to be harder for me to get protein in, but the day to day, and I'm privileged that I have the ability to work from home. So, I mean, I can stop and eat. And so I said, if I want to be serious about a strong body as I get older to avoid sarcopenia, I have to get serious. And so that meant a 12-hour feeding window, So in most instances, I'm breaking my fast fairly early, usually with 30 to 40 grams of protein. And the other thing that I've changed is that I eat before I exercise. I went many, many years of not fueling my workouts. And what I've come to find, and so on Mondays, I train with my trainer at 4 o'clock. By the time I see her, I've had 2 meals. And I told her we have another day where we work out at 9 and 9 o'clock in the morning. I can't push as hard as I can in the afternoon. And I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that I haven't had 2 meals, 2 good sized protein boluses, and I'm working out with a lot of fuel on board. And so for me personally, it has been my N of one experiment that building muscle and changing body composition, although I'm not a big person, when you look at those bioimpedance readings that are showing your fat-free mass versus your muscle mass, those don't lie. And so I was like, okay, I want to put on muscle. I want to put on 5 pounds of muscle, which takes a lot of effort at this stage of life. I'm on bioidentical hormone replacement therapy. I'm lifting heavy. I'm eating enough protein, and it's slowly happening, but it takes a lot of effort. And to your point, especially as someone who has a platform that's known about intermittent fasting, I was initially very nervous to share with my community. And I did very transparently this summer. And I got more positive feedback from people saying, I respect you more because you're willing to change your mind than being in an echo chamber. Because I had people saying, you're going to make a mistake. People are going to stop following you. They're not going to believe in you. And it's been completely the opposite. I think people respect me more for being transparent and encouraging them to say, hey, if this doesn't work for you anymore, that's okay. And so I humbly share that experience because I think that we as clinicians need to set the standard for our patients and our clients to say it's okay if something no longer serves you, or maybe it serves you, but you just do it episodically. So it doesn't mean that I never fast, but most days I'm eating in a wider feeding window. In fact, my kids think it's funny. They're like, Mom eats breakfast now. Yes, I do. It's not a big meal, but it's protein and usually some carbohydrate because my body likes the carbs, healthy carbs. I eat more carbohydrates now than I ever did in a long time. I was a long-term low carb, paleo, carb cycling. And now I'm like, days I lift, I eat more carbohydrates. It could be potato, it could be fruit, it could be a little bit of both, root vegetables. And so I encourage people that are listening to not be rigidly dogmatic, because if we let our pride get in the way of doing what's ultimately best for us, that doesn't serve us. And that's not how you lead.
You know what you're describing, being an unapologetic leader, young lady. That's what you're describing, because I know this must have been hard for you.
It was very hard.
Like, even just seeing you bust this out right now, I could see that it's a challenge. And I'll say this too, like, I've had people approach me. I'm close with a personal trainer and dietitian, CrossFitter. Her name's Deb Sloan. She told me this early on, and I told her, I'm not saying you're wrong. I just saying, like, I love working out fasted. I got good results fasted, and the more I thought about it, is like, I have no problem getting my protein goals in two meals. Like, no problem. I could get like, I'm at 205, getting 150 grams of protein.
Yeah.
I could do that in one meal, to be honest with you. So, like, not everyone can do that though, right? So
Yeah.
I really like the idea of personalizing it. Ultimately, we say to our clients and to our listeners, it's, what's your goal, right? And so when it goes down to that, I don't care how you get to your goal, because usually it's a health goal, obviously, and I want to teach you or guide you on how you can achieve that. And that's exactly what you're doing, because there's some people, like you said, they're still going to benefit from frequent fasting. But it just depends on what your goal is and what stage of life you're in. And I've been thinking about this too, Cynthia, to be honest with you. Like, I was, we both got supplement companies. I'm thinking about throwing a shake in pre-meal and seeing how it goes. Like, I don't feel tired during my workouts. Like, I feel like I could still, like, my workouts are still on point when I work out in the mornings, but maybe I could be pushing more. And to be honest with you, I would love to put on an extra couple pounds of lean muscle mass, because I know, like, you get that body armor now, because it's going to be harder to do that as we age. So
Yeah.
I think there's a lot of truth to what you're saying. And once again, just admiring your courage and your willingness to pivot.
Thank you. No, and I mean, what's ironic is I think I was talking to Stacy Sims, Dr. Stacy Sims, and we weren't even recording at that point. And I said, I just wanted to let you know, because I know she's not a fan of intermittent fasting. And I said, I wanted to give you like the N of one experiment. And I told her the whole story. And she's like, I'm so proud of you. Like, it gives me chills because I have so much respect for her. And she said, what you're choosing to do right now has so much long-term impact on the trajectory of your frailty index. Like we talk about, it isn't just the muscle loss, it's that you then become frail. And then when you become frail, you're more likely to fall, whether you break a hip, whether you hit your head, which is what happened with my dad. And I just keep saying, like, I'm thinking about that strong lady body. Like even my husband lifts pretty regularly. And I'm like, both of us, we do not want to be, we've got like teenage boys, eventually they're going to get married and have kids. I'm like, I want to be on the floor with my grandkids. I want to be able to run around with them. I want to be active and I want to be neurocognitively intact. Like, I don't want to be a burden to my family. And so the choices we're making now have long-term impact. It's hard to see that. Like, you and I know what happens when people get frail. But I think the average person, unless they've been directly impacted by a loved one falling, breaking a hip, hitting their head and getting a head bleed, and in my circumstances, until you've seen that impact, it's very hard to understand why muscle is so important. It is, of course, it's a body composition thing. I mean, that's not the reason why we do it, but I mean, it feels good when you've got a muscle suit on. But it's more about locomotion, stability. Like my trainer, actually, it's funny, she gets me on and off the floor constantly because she's all about functional fitness. And she said, if you go to a stand-up gym, sometimes all the trainers do is they just have you walking from one machine to another. But I am on and off the floor constantly, doing dead hangs, which if anyone's listening, the first time I tried to do that, I was shocked. I was like, oh, I'm strong. And we're slowly working up to 2 minutes. But the first time I did it, it was like 15 seconds. And I was like, what was that?
If you could do 2 minutes,
that's my
warrior.
goal. That's our goal. That's our goal. But I can tell you the first time I did it, I was 15 seconds and I was like, oh my God, this is so hard. But like helping us all understand that we want these abled bodies to be able to remain strong, not just skinny. Like there was so much focus on women in particular, just being skinny. And I'm like, skinny does not get you that strong body. And so thinking differently about how we want to age. And I know for both of us, I'd be encouraged. You'll have to send me a message and let me know if you eat before your workout, if it's any different. But I can tell you Mondays are my really hard workout. And my trainer knows this. So I walk in there knowing I'm going to get my butt kicked, but I'm like, it's not so bad because I've got 2 meals on board. So I've got lots of fuel to work through.
Wow. Yeah. I struggle with, I always find I'm a little bit lackluster in the afternoon workouts relative to the morning.
It's been interesting.
So I always alluded to that because of having food in my stomach, and I try not to have too heavy carb for my first meal, but a lot of variables there. But I'm gonna try next time I do a hard workout. I'm gonna try a shake before, and I'll report back. And
definitely let me know. I'd love to hear.
So Cynthia, this has been as usual. I feel like we're so aligned. I feel like if we were in the same city, we'd be doing more hangouts. Like you're just a genuine, wonderful person that's like impacting so many lives. And this is what the magic is of what you do, because that message of how to get healthy. Yes, you're an MP that was seeing people on the one-on-one, but your messages through your podcast, through your books, through your social media content has been impacting lives now for multiple years. So I just want to, first of all, just celebrate you. And how do people eat more of Cynthia Thurlow?
Well, thank you. It's always an honor to connect with you. And hopefully we'll both be invited back to Eudaimonia for 2025, because it would be great to hang out with you and your lovely wife again. Easiest way to connect with me is on my website. So it's www.cynthiathurlow.com. Obviously, Dr. K has been a guest on Everyday Wellness, which is my favorite thing I do in my business, along with speaking at events. Those are my top things that I love to do. But we have programs. We have a supplement line that's totally dedicated to middle-aged women called the Midlife Pause. That is the working title of the second book, although my editor's already told me she wants to adjust it, and I'm humbly open to the possibility of changing it. Like I say about everything is flexible, because I think that's so important. But if you listen to the podcast and you end up checking things out, make sure you send me a DM. I'm most active on Instagram. I'm a little snarky on Twitter, so be forewarned. Although lately I've been less vested in getting into discussions on Twitter that are anything less than just straightforward.
Oh, let me tell you, it's healthier. I guess I lose my mind with that stuff.
Yeah.
But Cynthia, thank you so much for joining us, and I can't wait to see you again.
Sounds good.
Killing it. I just wait for it to upload.